Okay, so you know how we always hear about how your family's background, like especially how well off they are or aren't, plays this huge role in how well you do in school and,
Yeah.
even how far you go.
Right.
And, we always want to make sure we're looking at the evidence here on the deep dive. So we get the systematic review to
Hmm.
really dig into that.
It's fascinating stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about, the connection between family socioeconomic status, SES, as the researchers call it, and what happens with kids educationally. And it's both academic achievement, so things like grades, test scores, that kind of thing, and also educational attainment, how much schooling someone actually ends up completing.
Okay, so a systematic review, meaning this isn't just one study. This is like a study of studies, right?
Exactly. It's like the super study,
Yeah.
bringing together all this research to try and really pinpoint, does coming from a certain background actually cause those differences in education?
Okay, so cause and effect, not just like, oh, well, wealthier kids tend to do better, but is it actually because of that?
You got
Got it.
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
And what's cool about this review is they looked at 24 studies, all published between 1990 and 2023. So pretty recent stuff. And what makes these studies so special is they didn't just look for correlations. They used really specific methods to try and see if changes in SES, like if a family situation improves or gets worse, if that directly leads to changes in how the kids do in school.
Okay, so it's like, you know how they say correlation doesn't equal causation?
Exactly.
It's like, in the fall, people drink more coffee and they buy more sweaters, but it's not like the coffee is making you buy a sweater,
Precisely, right.
right? They just happen to go together.
You just need that warm, cozy feeling
But cycling.
for both.
Yeah, so what's our mission here? What are we hoping to figure out by going deep into this causal research?
Well, I think it's about really unpacking what this research tells us about the true impact of SES on education. We hear so much about it being this driving force, but do these really rigorous studies that try to separate out all the other factors, do they back that up, or is it more complicated than that?
Right. Are we maybe overestimating the impact a bit?
Potentially.
Okay.
That's what we're here to find out. And also, are there any surprises along the way?
Always love those.
Right.
Okay, so before we get to what this review actually found, let's rewind a bit. What did the research that just looked at correlations, before all these fancy causal methods came along,
Yeah.
what did they tend to say about the link between SES and education?
Yeah, so those studies that just looked at basic correlations, they did point to a moderate link.
Okay.
So for academic achievement, remember that's the grades, test scores, stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The correlations usually fell somewhere between 0.12 and 0.3.
Okay.
And for educational attainment, meaning how much schooling someone finishes, it was stronger. So those correlations tended to be in the 0.18 to 0.4 range.
Okay, so, those numbers sound like there's something there, right?
Yeah.
You would think like, okay, where a family stands economically probably matters a fair bit for their kids' education.
Yeah, it definitely seemed that way from those studies.
But then this review steps in and says, hold on, let's see if SES actually causes these outcomes. And suddenly the story changes.
Yeah, it takes a turn.
Right.
The big thing that jumps out from this review is that when researchers specifically use those methods to really isolate whether changes in SES cause changes in how kids do in school, the relationship got a lot weaker. We're talking effects that are often like 0.1 or even smaller.
Wow. Okay, that's a big drop from those initial numbers.
Yeah, it's pretty striking.
So what did their meta-analysis? I know that's like the statistical way of combining all those studies.
Right, taking the big picture.
Yeah, what did that actually show in terms of like hard numbers for this causal link?
Yeah. All right. So the meta-analysis showed a small, and here's the kicker, it was non-significant effect of SES on academic achievement. So they use this measure called Cohen's d, which I know can sound a bit jargony, but it's basically a way to tell how big the difference is between two groups.
Got it.
So in this case, it's trying to measure like, okay, how different is the academic performance of kids from wealthier backgrounds versus kids from less wealthy backgrounds. But after those, researchers have really tried to isolate just the effect of SES, taking out all the other things that could be influencing things.
Okay, yeah, untangling it all.
Exactly.
Got it.
And so for academic achievement, they found a Cohen's d of just 0.03.
Okay, so help me out here. Cohen's d of 0.03.
Yeah.
Is that like a big deal, little deal, no deal?
Okay, so in Cohen's d world, a d of around 0.2 is considered a small effect. A 0.5 is like a medium effect. 0.8 is large, so 0.03.
Tiny.
Tiny, really tiny, almost nothing. And because it was statistically non-significant, it basically means we can't even be sure it's a real effect. It could just be random chance.
Okay, so if I'm following this right, all this really careful research is saying that the idea that a family's socioeconomic status is a major cause of how well their kids do in terms of grades and test scores,
Yeah.
that's not really holding up.
Yeah, for academic achievement, that seems to be the case.
Huh. That's kind of mind-blowing. I feel like we hear the opposite all the time.
It's definitely a shift in perspective.
Yeah, okay. But the review found something a bit different when they look at educational attainment, right?
Right, so remember, that's about how much education someone completes.
Mm-hmm.
And here, the meta-analysis did find a statistically significant effect of SES, but it was still small with a Cohen's d of 0.08.
Okay, so still small, but this time it is statistically significant.
Right, so it's more likely to be a real effect.
So remind me again, what's the key difference between these two things we're measuring?
Sure, so academic achievement is about how well you're doing in school right now. So grades, test scores, that sort of thing.
Okay.
While educational attainment is about the highest level of education you eventually reach. So it seems like while a family's SES might not have a huge direct impact on how well their kids are performing in class,
Yeah.
it might have a small but real influence on how far they end up going in school.
Interesting.
Right, so two different pieces of the puzzle.
Okay, and I think there was something in the review about looking at parental education separately from family income.
Oh, yeah. This is a really cool part of their analysis. So they found that the education level of the parents themselves had a stronger influence on their kids' educational attainment than the family's income did.
That kind of makes sense, though, right?
Yeah, it's intuitive.
Like you can imagine a parent who's gone further in their own education. Maybe they're just better equipped to help their kid navigate the system.
Right, they know what to do.
Yeah, and maybe they just place a higher value on education too, regardless of how much money they're making right now.
Absolutely.
So it's not just about money. It's about this whole other set of resources and values that come with education.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so then what about context? You'd think the impact of SES on education might look different in, say, a wealthy developed country with lots of support versus a developing country that might have, bigger gaps between rich and poor.
That's what you'd expect, right?
Mm-hmm.
But here's another surprise. When they did their analysis, they actually found no significant differences in the effects of SES between developed and developing countries.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's unexpected.
I would have thought, like, in a place where there's more inequality and fewer safety nets, that a family's SES would matter even more for their kids.
Right, you'd think it'd be amplified, but this research suggests otherwise.
Hmm.
And on top of that, they didn't find any significant differences in the effects of SES based on the specific research methods the researchers used.
So it didn't matter how they were studying it.
Nope.
Interesting.
The size of the study, the statistical models they used, even the specific kind of causal inference method, all of that didn't really change the basic finding that the causal relationship between SES and education was pretty weak.
So no matter how they sliced it.
Pretty much.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's really challenging that assumption that the impact of SES is super dependent on the specific circumstances or how the research is done.
Okay, so this is shaking up a lot of assumptions here. If SES isn't as central as we've thought, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, the authors of the review, they suggest that this throws some shade on those theories that put socioeconomic status right at the center of why we see these inequalities in educational outcomes. Because the causal impact seems to be weaker than what we see when we just look at basic correlations. It suggests that maybe some other things are actually more important in determining how well kids do in school.
Okay, so if it's not primarily about family income or parental education, at least not in this direct causal way, what else could it be?
Right, so the review mentions this idea of potential universal mechanisms.
Yeah, what's that all about?
So they don't really go into specifics about what these mechanisms might be, but it's this idea that maybe there are some underlying factors that are at play across different socioeconomic levels in different countries.
Okay, so sort of universal things that affect everybody.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Things like maybe the quality of early childhood education,
Yeah.
the influence of peers and the school environment, a student's own motivation and abilities, or just the overall quality of the school system itself,
Yeah, that makes sense.
But we need more research to figure out what's really going on there.
For sure. Okay, and one more thing. This review looked at studies published between 1990 and 2023. Any particular reason for that?
Yeah, they actually lay out three main reasons. So first off, the 1990s was a really big moment for global education policy with things like the UNESCO World Conference on Education for All in 1990 and the World Education Forum in 2000. And these put a huge spotlight on educational equity worldwide.
So a big push for making things fairer.
Exactly. And that probably led to more research trying to figure out what was getting in the way of that, including the role of SES.
Okay, makes sense. What was the second reason?
So secondly, there was a big boom in the availability of international data during those years. So we saw these large-scale studies that collected info on education from many different countries, which gave researchers a much richer picture to work with.
Okay, more data always helps.
Right.
And the third reason,
This is a big one. There were major advancements in research methods, particularly in how we figure out cause and effect during that same period.
so the tools got better.
Way better.
Right.
So they specifically mentioned this really important paper by Robert Lalonde in 1986 that kind of shook things up because it highlighted some problems with trying to say that something causes something else just based on observing that they tend to happen together.
Where correlation isn't causation.
Exactly. And that really spurred the development of all these new and improved techniques specifically designed to isolate cause and effect. So things like propensity score, matching instrumental variables, regression discontinuity designs, and differences methods. These are all fancy statistical tools that help researchers untangle all the factors and see if it's really SES making the difference or something else.
Okay, so they were able to be much more precise about what was causing what.
Exactly.
Okay, and I think they also mentioned something about how they categorized all these different causal inference methods.
Right. So for their analysis, they grouped the different methods from the original studies into 5 categories, but they emphasized that these weren't like a ranking system. They were just different approaches that researchers used to try and pin down that causal link.
Okay, different tools for the job.
Exactly.
Got it. And then there was also a note about one study that looked at both academic achievement and educational attainment together.
Yeah, that's right. So they highlighted a study from 2019 by Cui and colleagues that actually reported findings on both of those outcomes. And studies like that are really valuable because they can directly compare how SES might be impacting these two different but related aspects of education within the same research context.
Okay, so kind of a 2-for-1 deal.
Exactly.
Gives us a more complete picture.
Mm.
All right, so we've covered a lot here.
We have.
What are the big takeaways, the really key things people should remember from this deep dive into the causal evidence on SES and educational outcomes?
Okay, so big picture, the causal effect of a family's socioeconomic status on their kids' education, especially when it comes to academic achievement, seems to be much smaller than we often think based on just looking at correlations.
Okay.
Now, there is a small but statistically significant effect on how far kids go in school, their educational attainment. But even that effect is modest.
Okay.
And another interesting thing was that parental education seems to matter more than family income when it comes to how much schooling kids ultimately get. And perhaps the most surprising finding is that the impact of SES on education seems to be pretty consistent across different countries, regardless of whether they're developed or developing, and across all these different ways of studying cause and effect.
So it's not as context dependent as we might have thought.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Which really challenges that common idea that the influence of SES is totally different depending on where you are or how you study it.
So it sounds like we need to be really careful about just assuming that a family's SES is the main reason why their kids succeed or struggle in school.
Definitely.
This research is painting a much more complex picture.
Absolutely.
It's not just about money or even parental education.
Right. There are other forces at play.
Yeah, so if SES doesn't have this huge causal impact, like we often believe, then what does matter?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
What are those other crucial factors that shape a kid's educational journey? And that's where future research needs to focus.
Oh, sure.
And it's not just about understanding these factors, it's about what we can do with that knowledge.
Right? How can we actually create a more equitable system where everyone has a chance to succeed regardless of their background?
Exactly, because if SES isn't the be-all and end-all we thought it was, then there's real potential to make a difference.
Totally agree. This has been a really thought-provoking deep dive.
Glad you think so.
It definitely makes you question some assumptions and really rethink where we should be focusing our attention and efforts.
That's what we're here for, right?
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. This has been great.
My pleasure. Always happy to dig into the research with you.
And to all our listeners out there, keep those brains buzzing, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
See ya.